Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Words That Stick. I'm Sarah, and today we're diving into a topic that's near and dear to anyone who's ever tried to learn a new language or just wants to expand their vocabulary. And as always, I'm joined by my co host, Alex. How's it going, Alex?
Hey Sarah, I'm doing great. Super excited for today's chat. Remembering new words can be such a challenge, but it's also one of the most rewarding parts of learning. I mean, who doesn't love that feeling when a word just clicks and you start using it naturally in conversation?
Absolutely. There's something so satisfying about making a word your own. But let's be honest, it's not always easy. I've definitely struggled with it, especially when I was first learning French. I remember cramming vocabulary lists and then blanking out when I actually needed the words. What about you, Alex? Any memorable struggles?
Oh, for sure. I had a tough time when I was learning Spanish. I used to confuse similar sounding words all the time. Like, I once mixed up embarazada with embarrassed and told someone I was pregnant instead of just embarrassed. That was a fun conversation to backtrack from.
Oh no, that's a classic. But it's moments like those that really highlight how important it is to find effective strategies for remembering words. So let's get into it. What's your go to method for making new vocabulary stick?
I'm a big fan of the context is king approach. I've found that if I can connect a word to a specific situation or a story, it sticks with me way longer than if I just try to memorize it in isolation. For example, if I learn the word serendipity, I might tie it to a memory of a time when something unexpectedly good happened. It's like creating a mental anchor that helps the word float back to the surface when I need it.
That's such a solid approach. I've had similar experiences where context made all the difference. One thing I've been doing lately is creating little stories or scenarios in my head where I use the new words. It's kind of like turning vocabulary learning into a mini creative writing exercise. I've noticed it really helps with retention.
That's brilliant. It's like you're engaging different parts of your brain at the same time: creativity, memory, even a bit of emotion if the story resonates with you. And speaking of engaging different parts of the brain, I've also started using visualization techniques. For example, if I'm trying to remember the word elated, I might picture myself in a really happy situation, like winning a prize or something. The stronger the image, the easier it is to recall the word later.
Visualization is a powerful tool. I use it a lot too, especially with abstract words. Another method I've been experimenting with is spaced repetition. It's a bit more systematic, but it works wonders for long term retention. Basically, you review the words at increasing intervals, like first after a day, then after a few days, then a week, and so on. It leverages the brain's natural forgetting curve to make sure you're reinforcing the word just as it's starting to fade from memory.
Yes, spaced repetition is amazing. There are so many great apps out there now that make it really easy to use. I think one of the keys to success with that method is to make it a consistent part of your routine. A few minutes a day can really add up over time. Have you noticed that some words stick better than others, even with spaced repetition?
Definitely. I've found that words I have a personal connection with or words that are really useful in my daily life tend to stick better. Like, I'll never forget the word cafe in French because I used it all the time when I was traveling in France. But more obscure words, or words I don't use often, can be trickier. That's where spaced repetition really shines. It helps reinforce those less frequent words until they feel more natural.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like our brains prioritize words that are more relevant to us, which is why using new words in conversation as soon as possible is so important. Have you tried creating word associations or using mnemonics? I've had some success with that, especially for more complex or technical vocabulary.
Yes, mnemonics can be a lifesaver, especially for words that don't have an immediate connection to something in your life. I remember learning the word ubiquitous by associating it with ubiquitous, imagining someone saying, "You are everywhere." It's a bit silly, but it works, and the sillier or more vivid the association, the better it seems to stick.
I love that. It reminds me of how I learned the word garrulous. I pictured a parrot chattering away endlessly, and it just clicked. Speaking of animals, I think using imagery and sound associations can also be really effective, like linking the sound of the word to something familiar. Have you done anything similar?
Oh, absolutely. Sound associations are great, especially for languages that have a different rhythm or intonation than your native one. I used to have trouble with the French word beaucoup, which means a lot. So I linked it to the phrase beau coup, picturing someone bowing after a great performance. It helped me remember not just the word, but also the correct pronunciation.
That's awesome. It's all about finding those little tricks that resonate with you personally. I think one of the most important things to remember is that everyone's brain works a bit differently. So it's worth experimenting with different techniques until you find what works best for you.
Exactly. And that's also why it's important not to get discouraged if one method doesn't seem to work. It doesn't mean you're bad at learning, it just means you need to try a different approach. Another thing I've found helpful is making a habit of using new words in different contexts. Like, if I learn a new word today, I'll try to use it in a sentence when I'm talking to someone, write it in a journal entry, and maybe even tweet it out. The more you use it, the more natural it becomes.
That's such good advice. It's like building muscle memory, but for words, and I think it also helps to be patient with yourself. Learning a language, or even just expanding your vocabulary, is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes words take a while to fully embed themselves in your brain, and that's okay.
Absolutely. Patience is key. Another thing I wanted to mention is the power of emotion in learning. If you can tie a word to an emotional experience, whether it's something funny, sad, or exciting, it's more likely to stick. I've found that the words I learned during particularly memorable experiences are the ones I never forget.
That's a great point. Emotions really do create strong memories. I think that's why storytelling is such an effective way to learn and remember words. When you're invested in a story, you're not just passively absorbing information, you're emotionally engaged, and that makes everything more memorable.
So true. And even if you're not naturally a storyteller, you can still benefit from this by reading stories, listening to podcasts, or watching movies in the language you're learning. When you come across a new word in a story you care about, it's much easier to remember because it's tied to that narrative.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the idea of context and making words meaningful. I think one of the biggest takeaways from our conversation today is that the more you can connect a word to something personal, whether it's through stories, emotions, or experiences, the more likely it is to stick.
Absolutely. Vocabulary is not just about rote memorization, it's about making connections, creating associations, and using the words in a way that feels natural to you. And if you can have fun with it, all the better.
Couldn't agree more. So, for all our listeners out there, if you're struggling to remember new words, try mixing up your methods. Experiment with context, visualization, mnemonics, spaced repetition, and using words in conversation. You might just find that one of these strategies clicks for you.
Some questions and answers related to the topic: how to remember words.
What is the best way to remember new vocabulary words?
There isn't a one size fits all approach, but some of the most effective techniques include contextual learning, mnemonics, and spaced repetition. Contextual learning means learning words in sentences or real life situations. For example, instead of memorizing the word serendipity, try to associate it with an experience where something unexpectedly positive happened to you. This makes the word meaningful, not just an abstract concept. Mnemonics are memory aids that use associations, often through visual imagery or phrases. For instance, to remember the word garrulous, which means talkative, imagine a parrot chatting away non-stop. This funny image will make the word easier to recall. Spaced repetition involves reviewing words at increasing intervals, ensuring the brain is reminded of the word just before it starts to forget. Tools like flashcards or apps like Anki make this method easier to implement.
Why is it hard to remember new words?
Forgetting new words is normal because the brain is designed to prioritize information that's frequently used and discard what seems irrelevant. When you learn new vocabulary, especially unfamiliar or complex words, the brain doesn't immediately recognize their importance. That's why it's crucial to use active recall, reviewing and using the word repeatedly in various contexts. Without regular exposure and use, the brain quickly forgets the word. That's also where methods like spaced repetition help, as they combat this natural forgetting curve by reinforcing the word at just the right time.
Can visualization help with vocabulary retention?
Absolutely. Visualization is a powerful tool because the brain is wired to remember images more easily than abstract words. For example, when learning the word elated, imagine a very clear, vivid scenario where you felt extremely happy, like winning a competition or receiving good news. The stronger and more detailed the mental image, the more likely you are to remember the word. Associating the word with a personal experience or an image creates a mental link that helps with long-term retention.
How can I use spaced repetition to remember vocabulary?
Spaced repetition works by reviewing words at intervals that grow longer each time you successfully recall the word. Here's how you can use it. Start with daily reviews. When you first learn a word, review it within 24 hours. Gradually increase the intervals. If you remember it the next day, review it again in 2 days, then in a week, then in a month. The goal is to remind your brain just as it's about to forget the word, which strengthens your memory. Use flashcards or apps. Tools like Anki or Quizlet are designed to help you manage spaced repetition. They automatically adjust the review intervals based on how well you remember each word, making the process more efficient.
How does using new words in conversation help memory?
Using words in real conversations makes them more meaningful and practical, which helps your brain prioritize them. When you actively use a new word, you're engaging multiple parts of the brain, speaking, thinking, and often even listening to how others respond. This multi-sensory involvement reinforces the memory of the word. For example, if you've just learned the word ambivalent, try using it in a sentence like, I'm ambivalent about trying that new restaurant, during a casual conversation. Each time you use the word, it becomes more embedded in your everyday language.
Can listening to podcasts or watching shows help with vocabulary learning?
Yes. Listening to podcasts, watching shows, or even reading in the language you're trying to improve can immerse you in new vocabulary. This method exposes you to words in context, which is key for retention. When you hear a new word used in a conversation or storyline, you naturally pick up its meaning through the surrounding context. For instance, if you're learning English and you hear the word hasty in a show where someone is making a quick decision, you'll likely associate hasty with speed or urgency. Immersion helps because the brain remembers words better when they are tied to meaningful, engaging content.
What role do emotions play in remembering new words?
Emotions are incredibly powerful in memory formation. When you associate a word with an emotional experience, you're more likely to remember it. For example, if you learn the word euphoria during a time when you're feeling ecstatic, maybe you just achieve a goal or celebrated a big win. Your brain links the positive emotional state with the word, making it much easier to recall later. Using emotional experiences or even creating fictional stories that evoke strong feelings can significantly improve word retention.
How can I overcome frustration when words don't stick?
Frustration is natural when learning new words, but there are ways to overcome it by changing your mindset and learning approach. Be patient. Language learning or vocabulary building is a gradual process. Expecting instant results sets you up for disappointment. Celebrate small wins, like recalling a word after forgetting it multiple times. Mix up techniques. If a word isn't sticking, try using different methods. Draw an image, make a mnemonic, or use it in a sentence. Sometimes a change in approach can make all the difference. Practice in low pressure environments. Talk to yourself, narrate your actions, or use new words in text to friends. The key is repetition without judgment. Frustration often stems from feeling stuck, so mixing up strategies can keep the process fresh and engaging.
Can writing down new words help in remembering them?
Yes, writing down new words can significantly help in reinforcing memory. The physical act of writing engages motor memory, which aids retention. When you write a word, you're taking extra time to process it. You can also expand on this by writing a sentence using the word, creating a personal example, or a small story. Writing doesn't just help with recall, but also with understanding how to use the word correctly. Keep a vocabulary journal where you jot down new words, definitions, and sample sentences. This active learning process helps you internalize the words better.
How do word associations help with memory?
Word associations work by linking new vocabulary to something familiar, making it easier for the brain to store and recall. For example, to remember the word gregarious, which means sociable, you might associate it with Greg, a character or person you know who loves socializing. Creating a mental link between the new word and something already established in your mind creates a shortcut that helps you retrieve the word later. The more personal or vivid the association, the more effective it will be.
Can learning word roots improve vocabulary retention?
Yes, learning word roots, prefixes, and suffixes can be a powerful way to remember and understand new words. Many English words are derived from Latin or Greek roots, and understanding these roots can help you guess the meaning of unfamiliar words. For instance, the root bene means good or well in Latin. Knowing this, you can understand words like benevolent, meaning kind or charitable, or beneficial, meaning something that's good for you, without having to memorize each word individually. By understanding word roots, you can break down and remember complex vocabulary more easily.
How can I stay motivated when learning new words?
Motivation can be maintained by setting small, achievable goals, tracking your progress, and making the learning process enjoyable. Set daily or weekly goals. Instead of overwhelming yourself with dozens of words at once, aim to learn 5 to 10 new words a week. Small, consistent progress is more sustainable and rewarding in the long run. Celebrate wins. Each time you successfully use a new word in conversation, write it down or tick it off your list. These small victories keep motivation high. Gamify the process. Use apps like Duolingo, Memrise, or Quizlet to make learning fun. Some apps even reward you with points, streaks, or levels, making the experience feel more like a game than study. Engage with topics that interest you. Read about subjects you enjoy, listen to podcasts, or watch videos in your target language. If you're passionate about the content, learning new words will feel more natural and less like a chore.
What's the role of repetition in remembering vocabulary?
Repetition is crucial for transferring words from short-term to long-term memory. The more often you encounter and use a word, the more firmly it's embedded in your memory. Active repetition involves not only seeing the word, but using it in sentences, writing it down, or speaking it out loud. This engages different areas of your brain and strengthens the memory. Spaced repetition, as mentioned earlier, ensures that you review words at intervals that optimize memory retention. The key is to review words just before you're likely to forget them, reinforcing the neural pathways that store the word in your brain. Without repetition, even well understood words can fade over time, especially if they aren't used frequently.
How can I incorporate new words into my daily routine?
Incorporating new words into your daily routine helps reinforce them in your memory. Here are a few ways to do that. Label objects around you. Put sticky notes on items in your home with their names in your target language. Seeing the words regularly helps reinforce them. Create word challenges. Challenge yourself to use a new word in conversation or writing at least 3 times a day. For example, if you've learned the word loquacious, meaning talkative, work it into casual chats with friends. Use vocabulary apps. Spend a few minutes each morning or evening using apps that focus on vocabulary. They often offer daily quizzes, reminders, and progress tracking to keep your learning on track. Narrate your day. As you go about your day, try to describe your actions using new words. For instance, while cooking, think or say, I'm meticulously chopping the onions, instead of just, I'm chopping onions.
Why is it easier to remember words that have personal significance?
Words with personal significance are easier to remember because they are tied to emotions, experiences, or concepts that are meaningful to you. The brain prioritizes emotionally charged or personally relevant information. For example, if you learn the word nostalgia during a time when you're reminiscing about your childhood, the emotional connection makes the word more memorable. This is why words learned during personal experiences or emotional moments tend to stick better than abstract or unrelated vocabulary.
Is it better to learn words in isolation or in context?
It's almost always better to learn words in context. When you learn a word in isolation, it's harder for your brain to figure out how to use it. In contrast, when you see or hear a word in a sentence, story, or real life conversation, you gain a deeper understanding of its meaning, usage, and connotations. For example, learning the word deliberate by itself may not be as effective as seeing it in a sentence like, the team took a deliberate approach to solve the problem, which shows how the word is used in real life. Context provides clues about a word's meaning, making it easier to remember and use correctly later.
How can listening to music help with vocabulary retention?
Music can be a powerful tool for learning vocabulary, especially if you listen to songs in the language you're studying or songs that use challenging words in your native language. Rhythm and melody. Music engages auditory and emotional parts of the brain, making words more memorable because they're tied to a tune or beat. Repetition. Many songs repeat lyrics, which naturally reinforces vocabulary without it feeling like a formal study session. Context and emotion. Songs often evoke strong emotions, and when you associate new words with a particular song or feeling, they tend to stick better in your memory. For example, if you're learning Spanish, listening to songs like Despacito exposes you to colloquial vocabulary and helps you remember the words because they're tied to a catchy rhythm.
Is reading aloud effective for vocabulary learning?
Yes, reading aloud is an effective way to reinforce new vocabulary. When you read aloud, you engage multiple senses: sight, hearing, and speech. Improved pronunciation. By saying the words out loud, you practice the pronunciation and rhythm, helping you get used to how the words sound and feel. Better retention. Hearing the word, as well as reading it, creates an additional layer of memory. The more ways you interact with the word by seeing, saying, and hearing it, the more likely you are to remember it. Confidence building. Reading aloud helps improve your comfort with using new words. This is especially helpful if you're learning a foreign language and feel shy about speaking.
How can I use flashcards effectively for learning new words?
Flashcards are a great tool for learning new words, especially if you use them in combination with spaced repetition. Here's how to use them effectively. Create both sides of the card. On one side, write the new word. On the other, write the definition, along with an example sentence. Adding a sentence provides context, which helps you understand how the word is used. Use images or drawings. For especially tricky words, add a picture or sketch to represent the word visually. This helps create a stronger association in your brain. Mix review sessions. Start by reviewing the flashcards frequently, then space out the review sessions as you become more familiar with the words. Apps like Anki can automate this for you. Quiz yourself. Actively try to recall the word before flipping the card. The act of pulling the word from memory strengthens retention.
How do I know which words are worth remembering?
Choosing the right words to focus on depends on your personal goals and the context in which you plan to use the language. Prioritize relevance. Focus on words that are relevant to your daily life, profession, or areas of interest. For example, if you're a student, concentrate on academic terms, while if you work in business, prioritize corporate vocabulary. High frequency words. Learning high frequency words, those that appear often in conversation or writing, will give you the most return on investment. These are the words you'll hear and use the most, making them essential for fluency. Tools like word frequency lists can help you identify these. Tiered learning. Start with basic words, then gradually move to more complex, less common words as your vocabulary expands. You don't need to learn every obscure word right away. Focus on building a strong foundation first.
How can I retain vocabulary while learning multiple languages?
Learning multiple languages simultaneously can be challenging, but there are strategies to help you retain vocabulary across languages. Keep languages separate. Don't study two languages in the same session to avoid confusion. Instead, allocate specific days or times for each language. For example, you could study French on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and Spanish on Tuesday and Thursday. Use comparative learning. If the languages you're learning are similar, like Spanish and Italian, use this to your advantage by recognizing patterns. For instance, the word for library in French is bibliothèque, and in Spanish it's biblioteca. Recognizing these similarities can reinforce vocabulary across both languages. Apply the same techniques, spaced repetition, contextual learning, and word association techniques work just as well for multiple languages. Flashcard apps like Anki can even help you create separate decks for each language so you can manage your vocabulary learning effectively.
What's the difference between passive and active vocabulary? And how can I turn passive words into active ones?
Passive vocabulary refers to words you can recognize when reading or listening, but may not be able to use confidently in speaking or writing. Active vocabulary consists of words you can actively use in conversation or writing. To convert passive vocabulary into active, start using the words. Make a conscious effort to incorporate new words into your daily speech or writing. This forces your brain to move the word from passive recognition to active recall. Practice retrieval. Don't just review words by recognizing them. Try to recall their meanings and use them in sentences without looking them up. This engages deeper cognitive processes and helps transition words into active memory. Engage in active tasks. Writing essays, speaking to others, or even talking to yourself in a new language are active exercises that solidify vocabulary usage.
Can I use social media to help with vocabulary retention?
Yes, Social media can be an effective tool for improving your vocabulary in a fun and interactive way. Follow language learning accounts. Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube have language educators who post daily vocabulary lessons, quizzes, and tips. Engage with native speakers. Platforms like Twitter, Reddit, or even language exchange apps like HelloTalk allow you to practice using new words in real time conversations with native speakers. Create content in your target language. Posting in the language you're learning on your own social media accounts forces you to use new vocabulary. Whether it's a short post, a tweet, or a video, using the language in real world contexts strengthens retention. Social media creates an informal, low pressure environment to experiment with language and make learning more dynamic.
What is chunking, and how does it help with memorizing words dynamic?
Chunking is a technique where you group information into chunks, or smaller, more manageable units. It's commonly used in learning and memorizing vocabulary. Instead of memorizing single words, try to learn them in phrases or collocations, words that commonly go together. For example, instead of just learning the word decision, learn the phrase make a decision. This helps you remember how the word is used in context. Chunking can also involve grouping words by theme. For example, if you're learning cooking vocabulary, you might group words like stir, boil, chop, and simmer together. This method creates associations between related words, which makes them easier to recall as a set. Chunking helps because the brain naturally processes and remembers grouped information better than isolated words.
Can storytelling improve vocabulary retention?
Storytelling is an excellent way to improve vocabulary retention because it places words in memorable, meaningful contexts. Create your own stories. When you learn a new word, make up a short story that includes the word. For instance, to remember the word melancholy, you might create a story about a character sitting by a window on a rainy day feeling nostalgic. The emotional context of the story will make the word more memorable. Read or listen to stories. Engaging with stories, whether through books, podcasts, or audiobooks, helps you encounter vocabulary in a way that makes it easier to understand and remember. You can pick up subtle nuances of how words are used in different contexts. Role play. If you're learning with a partner or tutor, create dialogue scenarios where you practice new words through storytelling. This interactive method reinforces the words while making learning more enjoyable.
How does handwriting versus typing affect vocabulary retention?
Research suggests that handwriting new words helps with retention more than typing them, due to the cognitive processes involved in forming each letter. Handwriting engages motor memory. The physical act of writing by hand involves more brain areas than typing, including those related to motor skills, which can lead to better retention. Slower pace aids understanding. Writing by hand typically takes longer than typing, giving your brain more time to process the information and form stronger connections to the word. Deeper focus. Handwriting encourages deeper concentration as you're forced to slow down and think about what you're writing. This can lead to more meaningful learning experiences. However, typing can still be useful for reviewing and practicing vocabulary in larger quantities or through digital tools like flashcards.
Can mind maps help with vocabulary learning?
Yes, mind maps are a visual tool that can help with learning and organizing new vocabulary. Visual representation. Creating a mind map allows you to organize words visually around central themes or topics. For instance, if the central word is travel, you might create branches for transportation, accommodation, activities, and sightseeing, with related vocabulary under each. Connections between words. Mind maps highlight relationships between words. which helps your brain form associations and recall them more easily. This is particularly useful for seeing how words group together or how certain concepts are related. Creative engagement. Drawing mind maps can be a more engaging and enjoyable way to study compared to traditional lists. The creativity involved in drawing branches, lines, and connections helps reinforce memory.
How can I prevent mixing up similar words?
It's common to confuse similar words, especially those that look or sound alike. Here are strategies to keep them straight. Learn in context. Pay close attention to how each word is used in sentences. This will help differentiate the subtle nuances between similar words. For instance, affect and effect can be confusing, but understanding that affect is a verb and effect is usually a noun becomes clear when you see examples like the weather affects my mood versus the effect of the storm was devastating. Create mental images. If two words sound alike, create distinct mental images or associations for each one. For example, to differentiate between accept and accept, imagine accepting a gift and putting it in a box versus excluding accepting something from that box. Compare and contrast. Actively compare the words by writing down their meanings side by side, along with example sentences. This highlights their differences and helps reinforce when to use each one correctly.
What is deliberate practice in vocabulary learning, and how can I apply it?
Deliberate practice is a focused, intentional form of learning where you set specific goals, get feedback, and constantly improve by addressing weaknesses. Set clear objectives. Instead of just saying, I want to learn new words, define what you aim to achieve, such as, I want to learn 20 new words related to business English this week. Focus on difficult words. Spend extra time on words that you find tricky or frequently confuse. This targeted practice helps improve areas of weakness, turning difficult words into familiar ones. Seek feedback. If possible, work with a tutor, language partner, or friend who can correct you when you misuse or forget a word. Constructive feedback helps refine your vocabulary use. Review and refine. After learning a set of words, review them periodically and reflect on how you can use them more accurately or confidently in future conversations. So, Alex, we've covered quite a few techniques today: spaced repetition, mnemonics, visualization. But there's another one I've been hearing a lot about lately: learning through immersion. Have you ever tried that? Like surrounding yourself with a language or words you want to learn?
Oh, definitely. Immersion is huge, especially for language learning. When I was practicing Spanish, I used to change the settings on my phone and social media to Spanish. It felt weird at first, but it really helped. Suddenly, I wasn't just studying the language, I was living it in small ways. Even little things like reading captions, menus, and notifications in the target language start to add up.
That's a great idea. I think those small, everyday interactions really reinforce learning in a natural way. I've started listening to podcasts in French while I do chores or go for a walk. At first, I barely understood anything, but over time, I started picking up words and phrases. It's amazing how your brain adapts without you even realizing it.
Exactly. Even if you're not understanding every word at first, just being exposed to the rhythm and flow of the language helps a lot. I think it's also about training your brain to get comfortable with not understanding everything immediately. And that's a big part of the learning process.
Yes, I think we often put pressure on ourselves to understand everything right away. But it's totally fine to be in that fuzzy phase where you're absorbing things bit by bit. The more exposure you get, the clearer things become over time. And even if you're just learning new words in your native language, immersion works too, like reading books or watching shows that use more advanced vocabulary.
Exactly. It's all about consistent exposure. One thing I've noticed is that when I'm reading, if I don't know a word, I try to figure out its meaning through context before I reach for a dictionary. That little mental exercise helps solidify the word in my brain. Have you tried that?
Yes, I love that approach. Trying to guess the meaning first not only makes it more engaging, but also gives you a sense of accomplishment when you get it right. Plus, even if you're wrong, when you do look it up, the correction sticks because you've already spent some mental effort on it.
That's so true. There's something about that aha moment when you finally get it that makes the word more memorable. Speaking of reading, do you ever reread books or articles? I've found that revisiting material, especially something you enjoyed the first time, helps reinforce vocabulary.
I do, actually. I used to think rereading was kind of a waste of time, but now I see the value in it. When you already know the plot, you can focus more on the language itself and notice new words or expressions that you might have missed the first time around. It's a great way to reinforce what you've learned without feeling like you're just drilling words.
Exactly. It's kind of like when you watch a movie for the second time and suddenly notice all these details you missed before. The same goes for words and phrases. They stand out more once you're familiar with the overall content.
Totally. And something else that's helped me is talking to myself out loud in the language or with new words I've learned. I know it sounds weird, but it really works. I'll describe what I'm doing or narrate my day, and it helps me practice using new vocabulary in a natural way.
Oh, I do that too. It's such a good way to practice without the pressure of a real conversation. Plus, you get to play around with words and experiment. It's also good for building confidence, especially if you're learning a new language and feel nervous about speaking with others.
Exactly. And if you make a mistake, no one's there to correct you except yourself. It's a low stakes way to get comfortable with new words. Another thing I do is record myself. Sometimes I'll try speaking for a minute or two and then listen back. It's a bit cringy at first, but it's so helpful for catching mistakes or noticing which words flow easily and which ones I struggle with.
That's a great idea. I've never tried recording myself, but it sounds like an awesome way to get feedback, especially since you can listen at your own pace and pinpoint areas to improve. And speaking of feedback, practicing with a language partner or a friend who's also learning can be super helpful. You can exchange ideas, correct each other, and learn together.
For sure. Learning with someone else makes it more fun and interactive. Plus, when you're explaining a new word or concept to someone else, it reinforces your own understanding. I've noticed that teaching someone what I've learned helps the knowledge stick with me even more.
Absolutely. It's like the saying goes, you don't really understand something until you can teach it. So, whether it's learning new vocabulary or mastering a language, explaining it to someone else is a game changer.
I love that. And honestly, I think a big part of this whole process is just finding joy in learning. It's easy to get frustrated or feel like you're not making progress, but if you focus on the small victories, like finally remembering that tricky word or using it in conversation, it keeps you motivated.
That's such a great point. Celebrating those little wins can make all the difference. Learning is a journey, and the more you enjoy it, the more likely you are to stick with it. Whether it's through immersion, reading, or just talking to yourself in the mirror, it's all part of the fun.
Exactly. So, for everyone listening, don't be afraid to mix up your learning techniques and find what works best for you. Whether it's spaced repetition, visualization, immersion, or just chatting with a friend, every little bit helps. And remember, the journey is just as important as the destination.
Well said, Sarah. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thanks to everyone who tuned in today, and we hope you found some useful tips to help those words stick. Keep experimenting, stay patient, and most importantly, have fun with it.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll catch you next time.
Bye for now.